A black teen is traded to a giant cowboy as payment for debts, but he had shocking plans. The deal goes down in the middle of town, dust swirling, gamblers laughing, a boy handed over like cattle. The townsfolk whisper, certain the boys. Life is over. But when the giant cowboy takes him home, something happens no one expected. Instead of chains, he gives the boy boots, a rifle, and calls him partner. Yet shadows loom. A banker whispers lies. The sheriff rattles his jail. Keys. And just when the boy dares to dream of freedom, he's dragged off in chains, facing a courtroom where his very soul hangs in the balance. But hidden in the cowboy's scarred hands is a secret that could shatter the town and rewrite the boy's fate forever. Will this shocking truth set him free or destroy them both? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now and if this story speaks to you. Make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one, the late autumn. Wind whistled through Ridgetop's dusty Main Street, rattling the loose boards of shop signs and stirring fallen leaves into tiny whirlwinds. Outside Morgan's General Store, 17-year-old William Price hefted another heavy burlap sack of grain onto his shoulder, his muscles straining beneath his worn cotton shirt. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the packed dirt as he worked, unaware of the gathering storm about to upend his life. Inside the store, the air was thick with tobacco smoke and the sour smell of whiskey. Hiram Price, William's foster guardian, slouched against the counter, his bloodshot eyes fixed on a stack of unpaid bills. The man's hands trembled as he reached for the bottle beside him, his once crisp white shirt now wrinkled and stained. The saloon doors across the street swung open with a creak, and several townsfolk spilled out onto the wooden sidewalk. Voices carried on the wind, spreading the word of Hiram's mounting debts like wildfire. William paused in his work, catching fragments of their whispered conversations. Price is done for, can't pay what he owes. Hardwick's coming to collect. The mention of Amos Hardwick's name sent a chill through the afternoon air. The banker was a tall, thin man who wore his wealth like armor from his polished boots to his silver watch chain. His arrival drew every eye in town as he strode purposefully toward the store. His black coat billowing behind him, William set down another sack, wiping sweat from his brow with his sleeve. Through the store window, he could see Hiram straightening up, trying to summon some dignity as Hardwick entered. More townspeople gathered, sensing the drama about to unfold. They clustered near the hitching posts and water trough, their faces a mix of curiosity and barely concealed satisfaction at another man's downfall. Price. Hardwick's voice cut through the murmur of the crowd as he stepped into the store. I believe we need to discuss your outstanding obligations. William moved closer to the door, his heart pounding. He'd seen this scene play out before with other debtors, Hardwick showing no mercy, taking homes, lands, and livelihoods with the cold precision of a surgeon's knife. Now, Amos, Hiram slurred, I can explain. Just need a little more time. Time. Hardwick's laugh was sharp as broken glass. You've had 3 months of more time. I'm here to collect what's owed, one way or another. The crowd pressed closer as Hiram stumbled out onto the boardwalk, Hardwick following like a shadow. William stood frozen, gripping a sack of grain as his foster father's bleary eyes swept the street and then fixed on him with sudden calculation. The boy, Hiram blurted out, gesturing wildly toward William. He's worth something. Strong? As an ox reads and writes too. Take him as payment. A collective gasp rose from the onlookers. William's fingers went numb, the grain sack slipping from his grasp to split open at his feet. Corn scattered across the wooden planks, but no one moved to help him gather it. You'd trade away your own foster son, someone in the crowd muttered. But Hiram was too far gone to show shame. Interesting proposition, Hardwick mused, studying William like a horse at auction. But what use would I have for He broke off as a new figure appeared at the edge of the crowd. The townspeople parted instinctively as Noel Carter approached, his spurs chiming softly against the packed earth. The rancher's massive frame cast a long shadow, and the scar along his jaw seemed to deepen in the slanting sunlight. William had seen Carter in town before, but never up close. The man's reputation preceded him, a former railroad enforcer turned rancher who lived alone in a cabin miles from town. Some said he was seeking peace after years of violence. Others claimed he was hiding from a dark past. All William knew was that when Carter spoke, people listened. "I'll take the boy," Carter said, his voice low but carrying clearly across the sudden silence. "To settle Price's debt." Hardwick's thin lips curved into a smile. "Now that's an interesting development." "You sure about this?" Carter's taking on another man's burden, I'm sure. Carter's eyes met William's for a brief moment, and something unreadable flickered in their depths. "Get his things together. We're leaving before sundown." The next few minutes passed in a blur for William. Someone he couldn't remember who helped him gather his meager belongings: a change of clothes, a worn Bible, and a cherished set of drawing pencils. He watched numbly as Hardwick and Carter exchanged papers, making his transfer official. With the stroke of a pen, Hiram didn't even look at him as he was led away. The man who had been his guardian for the past 5 years simply turned back toward the saloon, shoulders hunched, leaving William to his fate. Carter's wagon waited at the edge of town, the horses stamping impatiently. William climbed up beside his new owner. "Master?" He didn't know what to call this stranger who had just purchased him like a piece of livestock, as they pulled away from Ridgetop. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of amber and blood red. William couldn't help looking back at the crowd, still gathered in the street. Some faces showed pity, others amusement. But most just seemed relieved that the drama was over and they could return to their ordinary lives. The wagon wheels creaked over the rutted road, each turn taking them further from everything William had known. Beside him, Carter sat straight and silent, handling the reins with careful precision. The man's presence felt like a mountain, solid and immovable. But whether that mountain would provide shelter or crush him, William couldn't tell. A few jeers and catcalls followed them out of town, the cruel words carrying on the wind. Good riddance. One less mouth to feed. Better earn your keep, boy. William's hands clenched in his lap as the voices faded behind them. His whole world had shifted in the space of an afternoon, traded away like a sack of grain. He stared at the darkening road ahead, fighting back tears that threatened to fall. Was this his punishment or his salvation? Only time would tell. The wagon continued its steady pace as Ridgetop disappeared behind them, swallowed by the gathering dusk. The only sounds were the creak of leather, the rhythmic clip-clop of hooves, and the whisper of the wind through the autumn grass. William sat rigid beside the stranger who now controlled his fate, his few possessions bundled at his feet. Watching the last rays of sunlight fade from the Colorado sky, he couldn't know then that this journey away from Ridgetop was just the beginning, that the tall, scarred man beside him would become more than just another master, that the road ahead held not just hardship, but hope. For now, all William could do was hold on to his dignity and pray that, whatever waited at the end of this rutted road, would be better than what he'd left behind. Dawn crept through the cabin's single window, casting pale light across William's face. He blinked awake, momentarily confused by the unfamiliar scent of pine boards and wood smoke. The events of yesterday crashed back into his mind, being traded away. The long, silent wagon ride, arriving at this remote cabin well after dark, he lay still in the rough blankets Noel had tossed up to the sleeping loft, listening to movement below. The crackle of a freshly stoked fire, the soft thud of boots on plank flooring, the clatter of cast iron on the cook stove. His stomach tightened, both from hunger and apprehension. In his experience, new masters always started harsh, establishing their authority. Early William eased to the edge of the loft, peering down at the cabin's main room. Morning light revealed what darkness had hidden: a simple but orderly space. A plank table with 2 chairs, a row of hooks holding tools and garments, a shelf of books beside the stone fireplace. Everything had its place. Noel Carter stood at the cook stove, his broad shoulders blocking most of the view. The sizzle and aroma of frying bacon filled the air. William's mouth watered despite his unease. "Best come on down," Noel said without set. Turning, breakfast's nearly ready. William climbed down the ladder carefully, keeping his movements quiet and precise. He stood uncertainly by the table, waiting for orders or criticism. Instead, Noel turned from the stove and set down a plate heaped with bacon and golden cornbread. Steam rose from the food, carrying the scent of butter and honey. A second plate followed, along with 2 tin cups of coffee. "Sit," Noel said, taking his own chair. It wasn't quite an order, but not quite a request either. William perched on the edge of the other chair, hands in his lap. He'd learned to wait for permission before touching food. Noel studied him for a long moment, his scarred face unreadable in the morning light. Then he rose and crossed to a trunk against the wall. William tensed, but Noel simply withdrew several items and returned to the table. He set them down one by one: a pair of sturdy leather boots, a Winchester rifle, well-maintained but showing honest wear, a leather-bound Bible, its pages soft with use. "These are yours now," Noel said quietly, "along with a fair wage for fair work." William stared at the items, then at Noel, uncomprehending. The man's next words stopped his breath entirely. "You ain't my property, boy. You're my partner if you'll have me." The words hung in the air between them, weighty as thunder before a storm. William's hands trembled slightly as he tried to make sense of this unexpected turn. "I don't understand, sir," he managed finally. "Name's Noel," the big man corrected gently. "And it's simple enough. This ranch needs 2 pairs of hands to work it proper. I need a partner, not a slave." He gestured to the cooling food. "Best eat while it's warm. Days waiting on us." William picked up his fork with careful movements, still half expecting the offer to be withdrawn. The bacon was crisp, the cornbread fresh and sweet. He ate slowly, watching Noel from the corner of his eye. The man simply focused on his own breakfast, seemingly content with silence. After they'd eaten, Noel showed him where to wash up at the pump outside. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of sage and distant snow. Mountains rose blue and massive to the west. The cabin sat in a natural bowl of land, with corrals and outbuildings scattered nearby. A creek wound through the property, its banks lined with cottonwoods gone gold with autumn. "Boots first," Noel said, nodding at William's worn footwear. "Can't work proper in those." The new boots fit perfectly, though William couldn't fathom how Noel had known his size. The leather was stiff but good quality, promising to last 4 years with proper care. They spent the morning checking fence lines, Noel leading his horse while William walked beside him. The big man pointed out landmarks and boundaries, explaining water rights and grazing patterns. He showed William how to test wire tension, how to spot posts that needed replacing. "Railroad taught me to break things," Noel said suddenly, as they worked on a sagging section. "Break people's will, break their spirit. Didn't sit right with my soul." He pulled the wire taut, muscles bunching under his shirt. Figured it was time to learn about mending instead. William nodded, holding the post steady as Noel secured the wire. He understood something about broken spirits himself. They moved on to the horse corrals, where Noel demonstrated proper feeding and grooming techniques. His hands were gentle with the animals despite their size. He knew each horse by name, spoke to them quietly as he worked. "Every creature deserves respect," he said, brushing out a mare's tangled mane. "Even the ones that come to you scared and hurting. Sometimes, especially those ones." William felt the words settle deep in his chest, warming places long gone cold. As the sun began to sink, Noah led them to a clearing behind the cabin. He set up several tin cans on a fallen log, then held out the Winchester to William. "Every man on this ranch needs to know how to shoot straight," he said. "For protection, for hunting. Your choice if you want to learn." William hesitated. He'd never been allowed to handle firearms before. It was forbidden, dangerous even to show interest. But Noel waited patiently, the rifle held out like an offering. Slowly, William reached for the weapon. It was heavy, solid. Noel showed him how to hold it properly, how to sight along the barrel, how to breathe steady when squeezing the trigger. The first shot went wide. So did the second and third. But Noel never showed frustration, just made small corrections to William's stance and grip. On the fourth try, a can flew off the log with a satisfying ping. "Well done," Noel said, and the pride in his voice made William stand straighter. They practiced until the light began to fade, William hitting more often than missing by the end. That night, after a simple supper of beans and biscuits, William climbed back up to the loft. The new Bible sat beside his blankets where he'd left it. He ran his fingers over the tooled leather cover, remembering how his mother had taught him letters using scripture before she passed. Sleep was slow to come. The day's events tumbled through. His mind like leaves in a wind. The boots that fit just right. The patient lessons. The pride in Noel's voice when he hit the target. The quiet words over breakfast. "You ain't my property, boy. You're my partner." William lay awake in the darkness, listening to the cabin settle and creak. Fear still lingered. How could it not, after everything? But alongside it, fragile as a spring seedling, something else was taking root. Hope, he realized, for the first time in years. Hope was growing in the fertile soil of simple human dignity. The night wind whispered through the cottonwoods outside. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its pack. William touched the soft leather of his new boots, the smooth stock of the rifle propped nearby. Simple things, practical things. But they represented something profound. Trust, respect, possibility. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. Couldn't be certain this wasn't some elaborate trick or test. But for now, in the quiet darkness of the loft, William let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, he'd found more than just another master. Maybe he'd found a path to something he'd thought lost forever, a future of his own choosing. Dawn broke cold and clear over the ranch. William stood in the yard, pulling on his new boots while Noel saddled two horses in the dim light of early morning. The leather still felt stiff, but the solid weight of them gave him confidence. "Cattle need checking," Noel said, leading the horses over. "You ever worked with beef before?" "No, sir, Noel." William corrected himself. "Just horses at the livery." Sometimes, Noel nodded, adjusting the cinch on his mount. "Cattle are different. Ornery sometimes, but not mean if you treat them right." He patted the second horse, a steady-looking bay. "We'll start you on foot today. Learn the way of it before putting you up here." They rode out as the sun cleared the eastern ridge, Noel on horseback and William walking beside. The morning air carried the scent of sage and frost-touched grass. Their breaths steamed in the cold. The cattle were scattered across the lower pasture, dark shapes against the golden grass. As they drew closer, William could see they were mostly Herefords, their red coats bright in the morning light. "Main thing is keeping calm," Noel explained, dismounting. "No sudden moves. They spook easy, especially the calves." William followed. Noel's lead, moving slowly among the herd. The big rancher showed him how to check for signs of illness or injury, how to spot a cow ready to calve, how to move them gently toward better grazing. Like this, Noel demonstrated, using his body to turn a stubborn heifer. They'll follow the pressure if you're patient. William tried to copy the movement, but his first attempt sent several cattle trotting away. He flushed with embarrassment. "No matter," Noel said. "Takes practice. Try again." By mid-morning, William was starting to get the feel of it. The cattle seemed to sense his growing confidence, responding better to his guidance. When he successfully moved a small group to fresh water, Noel's approving nod made his chest swell. With pride, as the sun climbed toward noon, they stopped in a grove of cottonwoods near the creek. Noel pulled bread and jerky from his saddlebags, along with a battered leather journal. "Been meaning to show you this," he said, settling against a tree trunk. He opened the journal carefully, revealing pages filled with detailed sketches and notes. William leaned closer, fascinated by the precise drawings of landscapes, route markers, and water sources. "Used to survey for the railroad," Noel explained, his voice growing quiet. "Mapping new routes west. Seemed like honest work at first. Then came the disputes over land rights, company men getting greedy. Blood was shed." He closed the journal. With a gentle snap, left after that. Couldn't stomach the way they did business. William nodded, understanding in his bones how greed could turn men cruel. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the journal. Noel handed it over, watching as William studied the drawings. After a moment, William picked up a stick and began sketching. In the dirt, with quick, sure strokes, he drew the ridgeline above them, marking the creek's course and the major landmarks. Noel's eyes widened. "You've got the gift for it," he said, softly. "Where'd you learn to draw like that?" William shrugged, suddenly self-conscious. "Just something I could always do. See a place once, remember it clear as day." He hesitated, then added, "Used to draw maps of escape routes, back when, before. Never got to use them." Noel was quiet. For a long moment, his scarred face thoughtful. "That's a rare talent," he said finally. "Could be your calling someday. Honest surveyors are always needed out here. Men who'll map true, not just what the money men want to see." William looked up sharply, startled by the suggestion. No one had ever spoken of his future that way, as something full of possibility, rather than limitation. After they finished eating, Noel led his horse over. "Time you learn to ride proper," he said. "Can't work cattle on foot forever." William eyed the horse nervously. He'd helped care for them at the livery, but riding was another matter entirely. "I'll help you up," Noel said. "Old Jack here's steady as they come." With Noel's guidance, William managed to swing into the saddle. The height was dizzying at first, and he clutched the horn tight enough to whiten his knuckles. "Relax your legs," Noel instructed, adjusting William's stirrups. "Let your weight sink down. Horse can feel every tension in your body." Slowly, William began to find his balance. Noel led Jack in a wide circle, showing William how to move with the horse's motion. When William posted too high and nearly lost his seat, Noel steadied him with a strong hand. To his own surprise, William found himself laughing at his clumsiness. The sound startled him. He couldn't remember the last time he'd laughed out loud. "That's the way," Noel said, smiling. "Best. Riders I know all started by falling off a few times." They worked with the horses until the shadows began to lengthen. By the time they headed back to the cabin, William's legs were trembling with fatigue. But he felt a deep satisfaction in the day's accomplishments. After a simple supper of beans and cornbread, Noel lit the lamp and reached for his Bible. The firelight cast soft shadows on the cabin walls as he opened to a marked page. "Mind if I read a spell?" he asked. William shook his head, settling back in his chair. The evening ritual was becoming familiar, almost comfortable. Noel's deep voice filled the quiet cabin as he read, "For ye have not received the spirit of bondage again to fear, but ye have received the spirit of adoption, whereby we cry, Abba, Father." The words hung in the air like smoke, heavy with meaning. William stared into the fire, his throat tight with sudden emotion. He knew the verse spoke of spiritual matters, but something in it echoed deeper, touching places in his heart. He'd tried to keep Walt away. Noel continued reading, but William barely heard the words. His mind kept circling back to the morning's conversation about his future, the easy laughter during the writing lesson, the quiet pride in Noel's voice when he'd shown skill with maps. The firelight softened the scar on Noel's jaw, gentle shadows, smoothing the hard edges of the man's features. In that moment, William could see past the intimidating size, past the grim reputation. He saw instead a man seeking redemption through simple acts of kindness, trying to build something good from the ashes of regret. William wasn't ready to trust completely, couldn't yet believe that this strange turn of fate might lead to true belonging. But as the fire crackled and Noel's voice filled the cabin with ancient words of hope, he felt something shift inside him, like ice beginning to thaw after a long winter. The evening deepened around them, full of unspoken possibilities. Outside, a whippoorwill called into the gathering darkness, its voice carrying across the quiet ranch. Inside, two souls drawn together by circumstance began to recognize something like family in each other's presence. Sunday dawned clear and crisp, the autumn air sharp with the scent of pine. William woke to the sound of Noel moving about downstairs, earlier than usual for their morning routine. The floorboards creaked as the big rancher pulled something from a trunk near his bed. When William climbed down from the loft, he found Noel laying out two clean shirts on the table. One was clearly new, tags still attached. "This here's for you," Noel said, pushing the new shirt toward William. "Figured you might need something proper for church." William touched the fabric hesitantly. The cotton was soft, well-made, nothing like the threadbare hand-me-downs he was used to wearing. "Church?" he asked, his stomach tightening with anxiety. Noel nodded, already buttoning up his own shirt. "Been attending Mrs. Henley's service since her husband passed last winter. Reckon it's time you came along." He paused, studying William's face. "Unless you'd rather not." William swallowed hard. The thought of facing the townspeople made his palms sweat, but something in Noel's steady gaze gave him courage. "No, sir. I'll come." They ate a quick breakfast of cold biscuits and coffee, then hitched up the wagon. The morning was still young when they started down the road to town, frost glittering on the sagebrush. William sat stiffly beside Noel, the new shirt collar stiff against his neck. As they approached Ridgetop, William's apprehension grew. The last time he'd seen these streets, he'd been property to be traded. Now here he was, riding in beside Noel, like what? He wasn't sure what to call this strange new arrangement between them. The little clapboard church sat on the edge of town, its white paint peeling in places. A small bell tower rose above the front door, and morning light gleamed on the simple, cross-mounted there. People were already gathering, their Sunday best a splash of color against the weathered wood. Noel pulled the wagon to a stop, then turned to William. "Head high now," he said quietly. "You've got as much right to be here as anyone." William nodded, though his legs felt wooden as he climbed down. As they approached the church steps, he could feel eyes turning their way, could hear the murmur of conversation drop to whispers. Just then, a woman in a dark blue dress stepped out of the church doorway. Her gray-streaked hair was pulled back neatly, and her face held a warmth that reminded William of summer sunshine. "Noel Carter," she called out, smiling, "so good to see you this morning." Her eyes moved to William, and her smile deepened. And who might this young man be? Mrs. Henley, Noel said, touching the brim of his hat. This here's William. He paused for just a moment. He's staying with me now. Welcome, William, Mrs. Henley said, extending her hand. We're blessed to have you join us today. William shook her hand carefully, surprised by the firmness of her grip. Thank you, ma'am. Noel's hand came to rest on William's shoulder as they entered the church. A steady presence that helped him face the stares and whispers that followed them down the aisle. They took a seat near the back, the wooden pew smooth from years of use. More people filed in, filling the small space with the rustle of cloth and quiet conversation. William kept his eyes forward, though he could feel curious glances being cast their way. A young mother hushed her children's loud whispers about the colored boy sitting with the scarred rancher. Mrs. Henley moved to the front of the church, and a hush fell over the congregation. She opened a worn hymnal, and soon the small space filled with the sound of voices raised in song. William knew some of the hymns from his childhood, though he'd never been allowed inside a white church before. As the familiar melodies washed over him, William felt something shift inside his chest. Here, in this simple sanctuary, the labels that usually defined him, orphan, property, debt boy, seemed to fade. The music spoke of grace, of belonging, of a love that saw past the barriers men built between each other. He didn't realize he'd started humming along until Noel glanced his way, approval warming his usually stern features. By the third hymn, William was singing softly, his voice joining the swell of others reaching toward the rafters. The service continued with scripture reading and prayer. Mrs. Henley's voice was clear and strong as she spoke of mercy, seeing God's image in every face. William found himself leaning forward, drinking in words that seemed meant just for him. But the peace of the morning shattered as they stepped out into the sunlight after the final blessing. Amos Hardwick stood near the church steps, his expensive suit a stark contrast to the working clothes of most congregants. His thin lips curved in a mocking smile as Noel and William approached. Well, well, Hardwick drawled, loud enough for others to hear. Ain't this a touching sight? The enforcer turned rancher, parading a debt boy around like he's kin. His eyes raked over William dismissively. Though I suppose even bad stock can be trained to look presentable. William felt Noel go rigid beside him, saw his hands clench into fists. For a moment, the air crackled with tension. William had seen men fight over less insulting words. But Noel didn't move. He simply fixed Hardwick with a stare so intense that the banker took an involuntary step back. The silence stretched, heavy with unspoken threat, until Hardwick's smirk faltered and died. Without a word, Noel guided William toward their wagon. Other churchgoers hurried past, faces averted from the uncomfortable scene. Only Mrs. Henley remained on the steps, her expression troubled as she watched them go. They were well out of town before William found his voice. "Why didn't you fight him?" he asked, glancing at Noel's still tense profile. "You could have." Noel was quiet for so long that William thought he might not answer. Finally, he spoke, his voice thoughtful. "Strength ain't just muscle, William. Sometimes it's knowing when to hold your tongue." He adjusted the reins in his weathered hands. Man like Hardwick, he wants to provoke a fight. Wants to prove we're just what he says, violent, unworthy of respect. Best way to beat him is to prove him wrong. William pondered this as they rode home through the autumn landscape. The morning sun had burned away the frost, leaving the world bright and clean. A hawk circled overhead, riding the warming air currents. With effortless grace, that evening as they sat down to a simple stew, William found himself watching Noel across the table. The big rancher ate steadily, seemingly unbothered by the morning's confrontation. But William had seen something important today, not just in how Noel had faced down Hardwick's taunts, but in how he'd stood beside William in church, proud and unashamed. The stew was good, rich with vegetables from their small garden. William sopped up the broth with a piece of cornbread. Thinking about dignity, not the false kind that came from fine clothes or social position, but the real dignity that came from being treated as a person of worth. A week ago, he'd been property to be traded. Now he sat at this table, wearing a shirt bought just for him, his belly full and his mind turning over new possibilities. Mrs. Henley's warm welcome, the swelling hymns, even Hardwick's sneering challenge, all of it spoke to a change-taking place, though its full shape was yet unclear. Outside, the evening settled soft around the cabin. A cool breeze carried the scent of sage through the open window, along with the distant lowing of cattle. Inside, the lamp cast a gentle glow over the simple room where two people, brought together by circumstance, shared a quiet meal and the beginnings of understanding. The autumn sun hung high in a cloudless sky as Noel's wagon creaked along the narrow mountain pass. William sat beside him on the wooden seat, his shoulders aching from the morning's work of loading timber. The path wound between steep rock walls, barely wide enough for the wagon's wheels. "I reckon we got enough boards for that new fence," Noel said, adjusting the reins in his calloused hands. "Few more trips ought to do it." William nodded, wiping sweat from his brow, despite the cool air. The loaded wagon moved slowly around a sharp bend, and suddenly Noel pulled hard on the reins. The horses snorted and stopped. "Lord have mercy," Noel breathed. Ahead lay an overturned wagon, its wheels spinning lazily in the air like broken windmills. Splintered wood and scattered supplies littered the path. But what caught William's attention was the sound, a soft whimper carrying on the breeze. Noel was already jumping down, his boots raising dust as he landed. William followed quickly, his heart pounding. As they approached the wreck, they found a woman trying to shield a small boy with her body. Both wore traditional Apache clothing, now torn and dirty. The woman's dark eyes watched them warily while the child pressed closer to his mother. "Easy now," Noel said softly, keeping his hands where they could be seen. "We're here to help." The woman's face showed both fear and pain as she struggled to sit up. A bruise darkened her cheekbone, and she shivered in the mountain air. The boy, no more than 6 years old, clung to her skirts. Without hesitation, Noel stepped forward and gently lifted the woman to her feet. She swayed slightly, but allowed him to steady her. William knelt beside the boy, noting scrapes on his small hands and knees. "I'm William," he said quietly. "What's your name?" The child looked to his mother, who nodded slightly. "Tazi," he whispered. The woman straightened her shoulders, though pain flickered across her face. "I am Nayland," she said, in careful English. Thank you." "Let's get you warm," Noel said. He turned to William. "Build us a fire, son, and fetch some water from the creek." William moved quickly, gathering dry branches and striking his flint. Soon, flames danced in a small circle of stones. He filled their water skin at the nearby stream, its clear water icy cold against his hands. Nayland sat close to the fire, Tazi in her lap. She accepted the water gratefully, helping her son drink first before taking a sip herself. William noticed how her hands trembled slightly. "What happened?" Noel asked, checking the overturned wagon for salvageable supplies. "Wheel broke," Nayland explained, her English halting but clear enough. "We were trading in town, going home now." She touched her son's dark hair gently. Wagon rolled. We could not move it. William remembered his own fear of being stranded, helpless. He moved closer to the fire, offering Tazi a kind smile. The boy watched him with curious eyes. "Come with us," Noel said. It wasn't a question. "Our cabin's half a day's ride from here. You can stay until you're healed up proper." Nayland studied him for a long moment, perhaps weighing trust against necessity. Finally, she nodded. "We are much obliged." They salvaged what they could from Nalen's wagon, some blankets, cooking pots, and a bundle of dried herbs that seemed important to her. Noel helped her and Todsie into their wagon, making sure they were comfortable among the timber before continuing down the mountain. The sun was setting by the time they reached the cabin, painting the sky in deep oranges and purples. William helped Nalen down, while Noel carried a sleeping Todsie inside. The cabin's single room felt smaller with 4 people, but somehow warmer too. William stirred up the banked fire in the hearth, while Noel set about making pallets near its case. Warmth. He remembered his first night here, how strange and uncertain everything had felt. Now he moved with purpose, heating broth and setting out tin cups. Tai-Hi woke as the smell of food filled the cabin. His dark eyes darted around the unfamiliar space until they found his mother, then relaxed. William brought him a cup of broth, showing him how to blow on it, gently to cool it. "Good," Todsie said after his first careful sip, offering William a shy smile. Nalen sat nearby, her own cup cradled in her hands. She watched her son with tired relief, then looked up at Noel. "Why do you help us?" she asked directly. Many would not. Noel settled into his chair by the fire, his scarred face thoughtful. "Reckon I've seen enough hurt in this world," he said. Quietly, "Time I saw some healing instead." He gestured to William. "Boy here taught me that." William felt warmth spread through his chest that had nothing to do with the fire. He busied himself with laying out more blankets, remembering how Noel had taken him in, offered him dignity instead of chains. As night deepened outside the cabin windows, Nalen began to sing softly in Apache. Her voice was low and melodic, weaving through the crackling of the fire. Todsie's eyes grew heavy as he leaned against her. The song clearly familiar and comforting. William didn't understand the words, but something in the melody spoke of home, of safety found in unexpected places. He glanced around the cabin at Noel's strong presence in his chair, at Nalen's gentle strength as she cradled her son, at Todsie's peaceful face as he drifted to sleep. Just days ago, this had been a lonely outpost, 2 people learning to trust each other across the wounds of lack, of the past. Now it felt alive with possibility, as if the very walls had expanded to embrace this strange new family they were becoming. Later, as William climbed to his loft bed, he could still hear Nalen humming softly below. The sound mixed with the familiar creaking of the cabin's timbers and the distant call of a night bird. He thought about how quickly life could change, how a simple act of kindness could open doors you never knew existed. In the darkness, he smiled. Whatever tomorrow might bring, tonight they were safe, they were warm, and they were together. Sometimes he was learning. That was enough. Morning sunlight streamed through the cabin's small windows, casting warm squares on the rough wooden floor. William stood at the table beside Nalen, watching carefully as she demonstrated how to grind cornmeal using 2 smooth stones. Her movements were practiced and graceful, though she still favored her bruised side. "Like this," she said, guiding his hands. "Not too hard. Let stone do work." William adjusted his grip, mimicking her technique. The top stone rolled smoothly against the bottom one, turning dried corn kernels into fine, golden meal. The rhythmic grinding filled the cabin with a soft, steady sound. Nearby, Todsie sat cross-legged on the floor, completely absorbed in a set of wooden animals. Noel had carved them during long winter evenings. Horses, cattle, even a small bear, each one shaped with surprising detail. The boy made quiet, galloping sounds as he moved a horse across the floorboards. "These good," Todsie said, holding up a wooden deer for William to see. "Who made?" "Noel did," William answered, smiling at the boy's wonder. "He's got real skilled hands for carving." Through the open door, they could see Noel splitting wood in the yard, his powerful shoulders swinging the axe in steady arcs. The morning air carried the sharp scent of fresh-cut pine. "Your father?" He asked innocently, still studying the wooden animals. William's hands stilled on the grinding stones. He took me in," he said carefully. "Gave me a home when I had none." Nalen's dark eyes met his understanding in their depths. "Sometimes," she said softly, "family is who chooses us, not who births us." William nodded, something tight easing in his chest. He returned to grinding the corn, letting the familiar motion soothe him. Soon the table held a small mound of fresh meal. Ready for baking, later that morning, Noel called William and Totsie out to help repair the corral. Several fence posts had worked loose in recent storms, leaving gaps where cattle might slip through. The autumn sun was warm on their backs as they worked. "Watch close now," Noel said, demonstrating a complex knot. His big hands moved with surprising delicacy, weaving the rope into secure patterns. "This here's called a boll-in. Won't slip or come undone, no matter how hard something pulls." Totsie crowded close, his small fingers trying to copy the movements. William helped steady the rope for him, remembering how patient Noel had been teaching. "Him these same skills? Like this?" Totsie asked, holding up his attempt. Noel examined it carefully. "Almost. Here, let me show you again." He untied the knot and slowly repeated each step, naming the parts as he went. "Loop like a rabbit hole. Rabbit comes up through the hole, goes around the tree, then back down the hole." This time both William and Totsie succeeded, their knots holding firm when tested. Pride glowed in Totsie's face as Noel praised his work. They spent the afternoon setting posts and stringing fresh rope between them. William found himself naturally translating between Noel's instructions and Totsie's limited English, bridging the gap with gestures and patience. The sun was setting when they finally finished, the corral strong and true once more. They walked back to the cabin, where savory smells drifted through the open door. Nalen had prepared a thick stew, stretching their supplies with wild onions and herbs she'd gathered. As they settled around the table, Nalen clasped her hands together. "We give thanks," she said, in careful English, her voice clear and dignified. "For shelter, for kindness, for new family found." William bowed his head, moved by her simple words. He thought about how quickly this cabin had transformed from a strange place to something that felt like home. Even the way they passed bowls and broke bread together spoke of belonging. But while peace grew within the cabin's walls, darkness stirred in town. The saloon was crowded that evening, filled with the usual mix of ranch hands and townsmen seeking relief from their daily labors. Amos Hardwick held court at his usual table, his banker's coat stark against the rough clothing. Around him, heard tell of what's happening out at Carter's place. He asked, his voice carrying above the general noise, taking in strays like some kind of circus show. Men leaned in, eager for gossip. Hardwick took a slow sip of whiskey, drawing out the moment. First, that Price boy, treated like an equal instead of property rightful, bought and paid for. His. Lip curled, now he's harboring Indians too. Woman and child, bold as brass. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Hardwick's eyes glittered in the lamplight as he continued. "What's next, I ask you? Man starts mixing with savages, treating colored boys like sons. Where does it end? Time was, folks knew their proper place." The whiskey flowed freely as Hardwick spoke, his words finding fertile ground in hearts already tilled by prejudice and fear. By closing time, angry voices filled the saloon. Men stoking each other's outrage at this violation of the natural order. Meanwhile, back at the cabin, William and Noel sat on the porch steps. The night was clear, stars scattered like silver dust across the dark sky. Inside, they could hear Nalen singing Totsie to sleep, her voice soft and melodic. "Mr. Carter," William said hesitantly. "What you reckon folks in town'll say? 'Bout all this?" Noel was quiet for a moment, measuring his words. "Men like Hardwick," he said finally. "They feed on fear. Fear of what's different. Fear of change. Makes them feel powerful, turning folks against each other." He turned to look at William, his scarred face serious in the starlight. "But fear ain't truth, son. Truth is what we build here. Respect, kindness, family. That's what matters." William nodded slowly. "Never had that before," he admitted. "Family, I mean. Foster homes, sure, but not." He struggled to find the words. "Not belonging," Noel finished quietly. "Yeah." William looked down at his hands, calloused now from honest work. "Here, though, with you and Nayland and Totsie. Feels like I found something I didn't even know I was missing." Noel's big hand came to rest on William's shoulder, warm and steady. "That's what I hoped you'd say, son," he answered softly. They sat together in comfortable silence, listening to Nolan's song wind down to peaceful quiet. The night air carried the scent of pine and sage, and somewhere in the distance a coyote called to its mate. Whatever trouble might be brewing in town, here on this porch, truth and family stood strong against the gathering dark. A week passed. Swiftly at the cabin, on a crisp morning, heavy clouds rolled in from the mountains, promising the first real snow of winter. Noel studied the threatening sky as he adjusted the straps on his hunting gear. "Best get some meat stored before the weather turns," he said, checking his rifle. "William, Totsie, you two ready?" William emerged from the cabin, wearing the warm coat Noel had given him, excitement clear on his young face. Totsie bounced beside him, practically vibrating with energy despite the early hour. "Now remember," Noel cautioned as they mounted up. "Hunting ain't just about shooting. It's about reading sign, moving quiet, respecting the land that feeds us." They rode out as dawn broke, their breath forming clouds in the cold air. Noel led them up into the foothills where deer often grazed. The terrain grew rougher, pine trees clustering thick on the slopes. William tried his best to move silently through the underbrush, but his boots seemed to find every dry twig. Totsie, by contrast, ghosted through the trees like a shadow already, showing the tracking skills passed down through generations. "Look here," Noel whispered, pointing to marks in the soft earth. "What do you make of that, William?" William crouched down, studying the ground carefully. "Tracks," he ventured. "Small ones. Rabbit, maybe?" Noel nodded approvingly. "Good eye. Fresh to see how clear the edges are. No wind-blown leaves in them yet." They followed the trail, William growing more confident in reading the subtle signs. A broken twig here, a tuft of fur there, each clue leading them forward. Suddenly, Totsie froze. Pointing silently there in a small clearing sat a plump rabbit, nose twitching as it nibbled grass. William raised his rifle with trembling hands, remembering Noel's lessons about breathing and aim. The shot cracked through the morning stillness. To William's amazement, the rabbit lay still. His first clean kill. Pride surged through him as Noel clapped him on the shoulder. "Well done, son. That'll make fine eating." Totsie darted forward to examine the rabbit, chattering excitedly in mixed Apache and English. "Good shot, good shot." They continued hunting through the morning, though. No deer presented themselves. As the clouds grew heavier, Noel called a halt near a sheltered overhang. They built a small fire, and soon the rabbit was roasting on a spit as they ate. Noel grew contemplative, staring into the flames. "Reckon it's time I told you boys something," he said, finally, "about who I was before." William and Totsie leaned forward, caught by the serious tone in his voice. "Used to work for the railroad companies," Noel continued, his scarred face grave. "Not laying track, they hired me to convince people to sell their land. Sometimes with words, sometimes with fists. He touched the scar along his jaw unconsciously. Did things I ain't proud of. Saw good folks pushed off their homes because some rich man in a city wanted the land. The fire crackled in the silence that followed. William could see the weight of old guilt in Noel's shoulders. Last job, they sent us to clear out a homestead. Family had papers proving their claim, but the railroad wanted that land. Noel's voice grew rough. Fighting broke out. People died, people who were just protecting what was rightfully theirs. That's when I quit. Couldn't live with being the kind of man who takes from others for profit. William stared into the flames, understanding growing in his chest. After a moment, he spoke softly. I know about shame, too, he admitted. Being passed around like unwanted furniture. It's never staying anywhere long enough to feel real. Noel's eyes met his across the fire, deep recognition passing between them. They sat in companionable silence, the shared honesty binding them closer than words could express. Totsie nestled against William's side, somehow sensing the importance of the moment. The sky was darkening when they finally returned to the cabin. Nayland met them at the door, relief clear on her face as the first snowflakes began to fall. They weren't the only visitors. Mrs. Henley's wagon stood in the yard. Inside, the widow sat at the table, a pile of blankets and books beside her. Her face brightened at their entrance. William, I've been admiring your drawings, she said warmly, indicating several of his sketches spread across the table. You have quite a gift for detail. William ducked his head, pleased but embarrassed by the praise. Mrs. Henley began pulling items from her basket, primers, paper, pencils, even a proper drawing journal. Every artist needs proper tools, she said firmly. And every young man needs education. We'll start with reading lessons next week, if you're willing. Before William could respond, hoofbeats pounded in the yard. A rider dismounted hurriedly young Tommy from the general store, his face anxious. Mr. Carter, he called Mrs. Henley. You need to hear this. They gathered around as Tommy caught his breath. It's Hardwick, he panted. He's gone to Sheriff Calloway. Says William's stolen property. Says he never agreed to sell him to you proper. He's demanding the sheriff arrest you for theft. The warmth seemed to drain from the room. William felt his chest tighten with familiar fear as the adults exchanged worried glances. That's nonsense, Mrs. Henley said firmly. William is a person, not property. It can't be stolen. Hardwick's twisting the law, Noel growled, using it like he uses everything else to control folks. Nayland drew Totsie close, her dark eyes concerned. William stood frozen, the taste of their successful hunt turning bitter in his mouth. Would he be torn from this newfound family too? Mrs. Henley's voice cut through his rising panic. Now listen to me, all of you. Hardwick may have money and influence, but he doesn't have right on his side. We'll fight this legally and properly. She turned to William, her face gentle, but determined. You're not alone anymore, child. We won't let them take you back to being property. That's a promise. Outside, snow began falling in earnest, blanketing the world in white. Inside the cabin, fear prickled through the room like frost, but underneath it ran a stronger current, the warmth of family. The strength of belonging, the fierce determination to protect what was right. Noel moved to stand behind William, his big hand coming to rest on the boy's shoulder. Mrs. Henley's right, he said quietly. You're my son now, papers or no papers. And I aim to keep you safe. William straightened under that touch, drawing courage from the solid presence at his back. Whatever Hardwick planned, he wasn't that unwanted boy anymore. He had people willing to fight for him now. He had a home worth defending. The snow fell thicker outside the windows as they gathered close, winter closing in around their cabin. But within those walls, the warmth of family burned bright against the gathering storm. The first pale light of dawn was just breaking over the mountains when William heard the sound of approaching horses. He had barely slept, the warning about Hardwick's plans haunting his dreams. Now, from his position in the loft, he could see riders emerging from the morning mist, the sheriff and 3 deputies, their badges gleaming dully in the weak light. Noel was already awake, pulling on his boots by the dying embers of last night's fire. Nayland sat quietly in the corner, Totsie still sleeping against her shoulder. The knock, when it came, seemed to shake the whole cabin. "Carter, open up sheriff's business." Noel straightened to his full height, jaw set firm as he opened the door. Sheriff Calloway stood on the porch, papers clutched in one hand. Behind him, his deputies kept their hands near their gun belts, faces grim in the early light. "What's your business here, Sheriff?" Noel's voice was steady, but William could hear the tension underneath. Calloway cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. "Got papers here declaring William Price as property belonging to Hiram Price's estate. Boy subject to seizure to settle outstanding debts. Property." Noel's voice dropped dangerously low. William saw his massive hands clench into fists. A person, not some chair or table to be claimed. "Law's the law, Carter." The sheriff thrust the papers forward. "These documents show clear as day that Price never properly transferred ownership. That makes the boy part of Price's estate, subject to collection." William crept down the ladder from the loft, his heart pounding. Noel's shoulders were tight with barely contained fury as he glanced at the papers. "This is wrong, and you know it, Thomas," Noel growled. "Using the law to treat people like property, ain't that what we fought a war to end?" The sheriff shifted uncomfortably. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Hand the boy over, peaceful-like." "No." The word rang with finality. One of the deputies took a step forward, hand moving to his gun. The tension in the room crackled like lightning about to strike. Suddenly, Nayland's voice cut through the silence, speaking rapid Apache. William couldn't understand the words, but her tone was urgent, pleading. She looked directly at Noel, shaking her head slightly. Noel's fists slowly unclenched. Though the anger still burned in his eyes, William realized Nayland was right. Violence here would only make things worse, especially with Totsie present. The sheriff sighed heavily. "Don't be fool-headed about this, Carter. I'll be back with more men if I have to. Don't make me do that." "Get off my land," Noel said quietly. The threat in his voice was clear, despite its softness. The sheriff and his men backed away, mounting up with wary eyes on Noel's towering form in the doorway. They rode off into the lightning dawn, leaving behind a silence heavy with unspoken fears. As soon as they were gone, Noel collapsed into his chair by the fireplace, the anger draining from him like water from a broken cup. William stood uncertain in the middle of the room, the familiar sick feeling of being unwanted property churning in his gut. "Sir," he ventured quietly, Maybe I should just go with them. Save you the trouble." "No." Noel's voice was fierce. He looked up at William, his scarred face lined with emotion. "There's something you need to know, son. Something I should have told you before." He reached into his trunk, pulling out a leather document case. "That very first day when I took you from town, I didn't just bring you here on a whim. I went straight to the clerk's office and filed these." He spread 2 documents on the table. William leaned closer, struggling to read the formal writing. "This here's manumission papers, legal document declaring you a free man, not property of anyone." Noel's finger moved to the second paper. "And this is adoption papers, naming you as my legal son and heir." William stared at the documents, his vision blurring. You filed these the first day." Noel nodded slowly. "Clerk's been dragging his feet about, sending them to the judge, probably Hardwick's doing." but they're legal and proper, filed weeks ago. He looked up at William, his eyes intense. I never saw you as property, son. From the first moment, I saw you as my boy. William sank into a chair, overwhelmed. All this time, while he'd been cautiously watching Noel, afraid to trust. The man had already claimed him as a son, had already taken steps to ensure his freedom and give him a real family. Nayland moved quietly around the cabin, preparing morning coffee and bread, giving them space for this moment. Totsi played with his wooden animals in the corner, humming softly to himself. Why didn't you tell me? William finally managed to ask. Noel's face softened. Wanted you to choose it for yourself. Didn't want you feeling obligated or pressured. Needed you to see what kind of man I am, what kind of life we could have together. William nodded slowly, understanding, filling him like warmth. Every lesson, every shared meal, every patient explanation, it hadn't been just kindness to a stranger. It had been a father teaching his son. The morning light grew stronger, filling the cabin with golden warmth. Nayland brought them coffee, her presence steady and comforting. They sat in silence for a while, each lost in thought. Finally, Noel spoke again. We've got hard times coming, son. Hardwick and his kind won't give up easy. But I want you to know, whatever happens, you're my boy. We'll face it together. What do we do now? William asked. First, we pray, Noel said firmly. Then we stand our ground. Truth and right are on our side, even if the law ain't caught up yet. They gathered together, Nayland and Totsi joining them. Noel's deep voice filled the cabin as he prayed for guidance, for protection, for justice. William felt strength flowing into him with each word. He wasn't that scared, unwanted boy anymore. He had a father, a family, a home worth fighting for. The morning sun streamed through the windows, touching each face with gold. The scarred rancher, the Apache mother, the small boy, and William himself. Different as they were bound together now by something stronger than blood or law. They were family. Outside, the winter wind moaned around the cabin's corners, promising hard times ahead. But inside, warmth and resolve filled every corner. Whatever came next, they would face it together, standing firm in the truth of who they were, not property, not outcasts, but a family forged in love and courage. 2 nights after the sheriff's warning visit, darkness wrapped around Noel's cabin, like a shroud. Inside, lamplight cast warm shadows as William sat at the rough-hewn table, practicing his letters while Noel mended a torn bridle. Nayland hummed softly, rocking Tosi to sleep near the hearth. The peaceful scene shattered as hoofbeats thundered in the yard. Carter, come out with your hands up. Sheriff Calloway's voice boomed through the night air. Noel rose slowly, his face grim. William, get behind me. Nayland, take Tatsy to the back room. The door burst open before anyone could move. Deputies flooded in, lantern light dancing off there, drawn revolvers. William's heart hammered as rough hands grabbed him, yanking him away from Noel. Noel lunged forward, but 2 deputies struck him with clubs. The big man stumbled, blood streaming from a gash above his eye. Stop fighting, Carter, the sheriff ordered as more deputies piled onto Noel. You're under arrest for theft of property and resisting the law. William struggled against the iron grip holding him. Let him go. He didn't steal anything. Cold metal bit into William's wrists as chains were locked around them. He watched helplessly as the deputies beat Noel down, clubs thudding against flesh and bone. Noel didn't fight back, but neither did he fall. Nayland pressed herself against the wall, clutching Totsi to her chest. The boy whimpered, burying his face in his mother's shoulder. Her dark eyes blazed with fury, but she stood motionless, knowing any interference would only bring harm to her child. Noel, William shouted as deputies dragged him toward the door. Noel. Through the blood streaming down his face, Noel caught William's gaze. "Be strong, son," he managed to say, before another club struck him. They hauled William out into the bitter night air. Stars wheeled coldly overhead as he was thrown into an iron-barred wagon like an animal. Through the cabin's open door, he saw Noel finally go down under the deputy's assault. They bound his hands and feet with rope, then dragged his limp form outside. The wagon jolted into motion, carrying William away from the only true home he'd ever known. He pressed his face against the cold iron bars, watching the cabin grow smaller, seeing Nayland's silhouette in the doorway with Totsie in her arms. The sight burned itself into his memory, a family torn apart by cruelty and greed. In town, buildings loomed like black shadows against the star-filled sky. A small crowd had gathered, drawn by the commotion. William caught glimpses of faces in the lantern light. Some turned away in shame. Others wore ugly smirks of satisfaction. The wagon stopped outside the livery stable. William heard Hardwick's voice, slick with triumph. "Lock him in there until..." "The auction don't want our property damaged." Property. The word hit William like a physical blow. After weeks of being treated like a person, like a son, he was back to being something that could be bought and sold. They shoved him into a tack room, chains still binding his wrists. The door slammed, leaving him in total darkness. William sank to his knees on the dirt floor, trembling with cold and fear. But in the darkness, Noel's words came back to him. "Strength ain't just muscle. Sometimes it's knowing when to hold your tongue." William straightened his back and began to pray, just as Noel had taught him. "Lord, give us strength. Protect Noel. Watch over Nayland and Totsie. Let truth prevail." Crosstown, deputies threw Noel into the jail's single cell. He hit the floor hard, his body battered and bleeding. Sheriff Calloway stood outside the bars, keys jangling in his hands. "You brought this on yourself, Carter," the sheriff said, but his voice held a note of discomfort. "Should have just handed the boy over, peaceful-like." Noel pushed himself to his knees, spitting blood. "A man stands up for what's right, Thomas, even against the law. If the law's wrong..." The sheriff shook his head and walked away, leaving Noel alone in the darkness. Hours crept by. Every breath sent pain through his ribs, but worse was the ache in his heart, wondering what would happen to William. Just before midnight, a shadow moved near the cell. "Mr. Carter." Mrs. Henley's whisper barely carried through the bars. Noel crawled closer. "Mrs. Henley." The widow's face appeared, lined with concern. "They're saying terrible things in town. Hardwick's planning to auction William tomorrow at noon. It's the adoption papers, the clerk claims they were never filed." Mrs. Henley's voice hardened with anger. "Hardwick's corruption runs deep." Noel gripped the bars. "There must be something. Listen carefully," Mrs. Henley whispered. "I sent a telegram to Judge Harrison in Denver this afternoon. Told him everything. The false claims, the violence, the corruption. He's known for being fair-minded, especially in cases involving freed people." Hope stirred in Noel's chest. "How long?" 3 days by horse, if he rides hard." Mrs. Henley glanced over her shoulder. "I'm gathering signatures tonight from folks who oppose this wickedness. Not everyone supports Hardwick's schemes. God bless you, ma'am. Hold fast to faith, Mr. Carter. William needs your strength now more than ever." She slipped away into the night, leaving Noel to pray in his cell. His body ached, but his spirit stood unbowed. He had promised William a home, a family, a future. No matter what it cost him, he would keep that promise in the dark tack room. William huddled against the wall, chains heavy on his wrists. He could hear townsfolk talking outside, their voices carrying through the thin walls. "Ain't right, treating a man like Carter that way," someone muttered. "Hardwick says he's a troublemaker, stirring up problems with Indians and Colorads." Another replied, "Since when do we let bankers run our town? since they hold the mortgages on half our farms. William closed his eyes, drawing comfort from memories of the past weeks, Noel teaching him to shoot, Nalen's gentle songs, Totsy's laughter, the warmth of belonging. They had become a family, unlikely as it seemed. Now Hardwick's greed and hatred threatened to destroy it all. But William remembered something else Noel had said. That night by the campfire, truth's like water, you can dam it up for a while, but it always finds a way through. In the jail cell, Noel's deep voice hummed an old hymn, the sound carrying through the quiet streets. In the tack room, William began to sing along softly, their voices joining across the distance in a prayer for justice. Outside, the winter wind keened around buildings and through alleyways, while inside, both prisoners held fast to hope, waiting for dawn and whatever it might bring. The stars wheeled overhead, marking time's slow passage, while in a Denver courtroom far away, a telegram waited on a judge's desk, bearing words that could change everything. The night grew deeper, and all across Ridgetop, people lay awake in their beds, troubled by the evening's events. Some felt shame burning in their hearts, while others wrestled with fear of crossing Hardwick's power. In her small house, Mrs. Henley wrote carefully by candlelight, gathering signatures from those brave enough to stand for justice. And in their separate cells, father and son held on to faith, bound together by something stronger than chains or law, the unbreakable bonds of love and truth. Morning brought no mercy. Hardwick strutted down Ridgetop's main street like a rooster in his Sunday best, gesturing for the deputies to parade William behind him. The chains clinked with each step, drawing stares from everyone on the boardwalk. "See here," Hardwick called out, his voice dripping with false authority. "This is what happens when folks forget their place. The law knows property when it sees it." William kept his eyes fixed straight ahead, though shame burned hot in his chest. Noel's words echoed in his mind. A man's dignity ain't in how others treat him, but in how he carries himself. He straightened his back, refusing to shuffle or bow his head. A gasp rippled through the gathering crowd. Nalen emerged from between two buildings, holding Totsy's small hand. Her chin lifted high. She fell into step beside William, though she spoke no words. Her presence declared louder than any shout that William was not alone. Tassy reached up with his free hand and caught William's fingers where they hung in chains. The boy's touch, warm and trusting, nearly broke William's composure. He blinked hard against sudden tears. "Get those savages away from my property." Hardwick snarled, but Nalen stood her ground, dark eyes flashing. Several townsfolk shifted uncomfortably. Looking away from the scene, Mrs. Henley worked her way through the crowd, clutching a sheaf of papers. "Sign here," she urged people quietly. "Stand against this wickedness." Some turned away, fearful of Hardwick's power over their mortgages and loans. But others, moved by the sight of William's dignity and Nalen's courage, took the pen with trembling hands. "Might lose my farm," one weather-beaten rancher muttered as he signed. "But I reckon I'd lose something worth more if I stayed quiet." The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly as Hardwick continued his spectacle. But just as he opened his mouth for another tirade, the sound of approaching hoofbeats caught everyone's attention. A rider appeared at the end of the street, his black coat marking him as a circuit judge. Mrs. Henley's face lit up with hope. Her telegram had worked. Judge Harrison had come. The judge dismounted, his weathered face taking in the scene, the chained youth, the native mother and child beside him. The banker's cruel satisfaction, the troubled crowd. "What's all this, then?" he demanded, voice cutting through the murmurs. Hardwick stepped forward, smoothing his vest. "Your Honor, merely collecting on a debt with chains." The judge's eyes narrowed. "I've received a most disturbing telegram about events in this town. We'll sort this out proper. Court convenes tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock sharp. William's heart leaped even as fear clutched at him. A trial meant a chance for justice, but also risk. What if the judge sided with Hardwick? The boy stays in the jail loft tonight, the judge ordered. But those chains come off. Now, the deputies hurried to unlock the iron cuffs. William rubbed his wrists, feeling Nalen's supportive hand on his shoulder. Totsie hugged his legs, and Carter. The judge asked. In the cell below, Mrs. Henley answered. Leave him there till morning. But see, he gets proper food and medicine for those wounds. That night, William lay on a thin pallet in the jail's stuffy loft. Through cracks in the floorboards, he could hear Noel's breathing below. Neither of them slept. You all right up there, son? Noel's voice drifted up. Yes, sir, William whispered back. Scared some. Natural. But remember what David wrote. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. William repeated the verse, drawing strength from the familiar words. From somewhere in town, he heard Nalen's voice raised in an Apache prayer song, its haunting notes floating through his barred window. The sound reminded him he wasn't just fighting for himself, but for this unlikely family they'd become. He whispered more scripture into the darkness. Verses about justice and truth that Noel had taught him. Each word helped steady his racing heart. Tomorrow would bring either freedom or fresh bondage, and all he could do was wait, pray, and hold on to hope. The courthouse creaked with the weight of the entire town packed inside. Morning sunlight filtered through dusty windows, casting long shadows across worn floorboards. William sat rigid in his chair, hands clasped tight to keep them from shaking. Hardwick had dressed in his finest, a tailored black suit that seemed to absorb all light. He strutted before the judge's bench, brandishing papers like weapons. Your Honor, Hardwick's voice dripped with false courtesy. These documents clearly show William Price as property belonging to Hiram Price's estate. When Price defaulted on his loans, all assets transferred to the bank's custody. He laid the papers on the judge's desk with a flourish. Judge Harrison adjusted his spectacles, frowning as he studied each page. The room held its breath. Sheriff Calloway rose next, hat crushed between nervous fingers. Your Honor, I can confirm the boy was legally bound to Price. When Carter took him, no proper transfer papers were filed. His eyes darted to William, then away. We're just trying to maintain order. See that property goes where it's meant. William's stomach churned at being discussed like a horse or cow. The wooden bench beneath him felt as hard as the chains from yesterday. Mrs. Henley stood then, her gray hair neat beneath her bonnet, her spine straight as a ramrod. Your Honor, I've known William these past 3 years. He's no property. He's a bright young man with a gift for drawing maps. He's been attending my Sunday school, learning his letters. She pulled out William's sketches of the ridgelines. These are his work. Does property create art like this? Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Hardwick's face darkened. Nalen rose next, little Totsie clutching her skirts. Though her English came halting, her dignity filled the room. I see this boy care for my son. Teach him gentle ways. Share food when we hungry. It's not actions of property. This actions of good man. Several women dabbed at their eyes. Even the sheriff shifted uncomfortably. The judge turned to William. Young man, do you have anything to say? William stood on trembling legs. The room swam before him, but he remembered Noel's teachings about standing tall. Your Honor, I am no man's property. His voice gained strength with each word. I was traded like a sack of grain, but Noel Carter treated me as a son from the very first day. He gave me boots, a rifle, taught me to ride. William's voice caught. He showed me what having a father means. Gasps echoed through the courthouse. Women whispered behind their hands. Men looked at their boots. The heavy doors suddenly burst open. Everyone turned as Noel Carter was led in, hands shackled. His face was bruised, his shirt torn, but his eyes blazed with unshakable purpose. Despite his chains, he seemed to tower over the deputies flanking him. "Your Honor," Noel's deep voice filled every corner of the room. "I demand to testify." Judge Harrison studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Remove those shackles." As the deputies unlocked his chains, Noel rubbed his wrists, his gaze finding Williams. A silent message of strength passed between them. "I have truth that needs speaking," Noel said, stepping forward. The crowd fell so quiet William could hear the clock ticking on the wall. Even Hardwick's smugness faltered before Noel's steady gaze. The entire room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for what this scarred, powerful man would reveal. William's heart pounded as Noel opened his mouth to speak. Knowing whatever came next would change everything. Noel reached into his torn shirt and pulled out folded papers, smoothed them carefully with calloused hands. "Your Honor, these are adoption papers and manumission records I filed the very day William came to my care. Properly signed and witnessed by Town Clerk Matthews." Judge Harrison took the documents, adjusting his spectacles. His eyebrows rose. As he read, "These appear legitimate. Where is Clerk Matthews?" Deputies brought forth the nervous clerk, who twisted his hat between sweating hands. Under the judge's stern gaze, Matthews broke. "Mr. Hardwick," he stammered, "he told me to misplace the filings. Said there'd be trouble if I didn't. I needed that bank loan, Your Honor." The courtroom exploded in shocked voices. Mrs. Henley gasped. Hardwick's face turned purple with rage. Noel's voice cut through the chaos, deep and steady. "William Price is my lawful son and ranch partner. Has been since the day I took him home. No man's property, but his own free self." "Indeed," Judge Harrison declared, bringing down his gavel. "This court finds Mr. Hardwick's claim null and void. Furthermore, his corruption of this office will be investigated." William surged forward, grasping Noel's arm. Tears streamed down his face as their eyes met. Around them, the townspeople witnessed justice triumph over greed, many nodding in approval at the truth finally revealed. The morning sun cast long shadows across the courthouse steps as Noel emerged, his shoulders straight despite the bruises. William rushed forward first, followed by Nayland carrying Totsie on her hip. Their smiles warmed the crisp autumn air. Together, the four walked down Ridgetop's Main Street, their footsteps steady on the wooden sidewalk. Some townsfolk hung their heads, shamefaced, while others offered quiet nods of respect. Old Mrs. Turner even touched her bonnet in greeting. Through the window of his bank, Hardwick watched them pass, his face twisted with defeat before he slunk away from view. That evening, the cabin glowed with lamplight and contentment. Steam rose from bowls of rabbit stew, thick with carrots and potatoes. Fresh bread filled the air with its homey scent. William's voice rang clear and strong as he read from Psalms, while Noel listened from his chair, pride shining in his eyes. Nayland smiled, touching each of their shoulders in turn. "K.O.," she said softly, teaching the Apache word. "Family." "K.O.," Totsie echoed, reaching for more bread. William repeated the word, feeling its truth settle in his heart. The firelight danced across their faces as peace filled every corner of their home. The mountains wore their winter white like a mantle. Snow lay thick across the ridges, pristine except for the hoofprints Noel and William's horses left behind them. The leather of their saddles creaked as they guided their mounts along the frozen creek bed. William pulled his sketches from his saddlebag, the pages covered with careful lines showing where spring water could flow. His drawings mapped channels that would carry life-giving water to both settler fields and Apache camps when winter released its grip. "These plans of yours," Noel said, studying the detailed work. "They are more than just lines on paper. You're building futures here, son. Bringing folks together through shared blessing." The setting sun painted the snow in shades of rose and gold as they turned toward home. Smoke curled from their cabin's chimney, promising warmth within. Inside, Nayland stirred a pot of beans and cornbread, while Totsy's clear voice lifted in amazing grace, a hymn Mrs. Henley had taught him. After supper, William knelt beside his bed, moonlight streaming through the window. "Thank you, Lord," he prayed, his voice soft but certain, for a father, a family, and a future. Noel's weathered hand came to rest on William's shoulder, steady and strong. The cabin glowed with warmth and hope, a beacon against the winter night. Thanks for watching. Stories like this shape us in ways we don't always expect. If something resonated, subscribe. I'm back tomorrow with another one worth hearing.